Hei, tervetuloa tähän Creaturan ensimmäiselle videolle. Tänään tehdään tämä video Paraguayssa, missä me ollaan Heidin kanssa reissaamassa. Ja tänään me esitellään Para La Tierra, paikallinen järjestö, mikä on ympäristöasioihin ja ympäristöasioihin perehtyvä järjestö. Ja meillä on täällä haastateltavan järjestön yksi perustajista Joseph. Welcome to our video.
Thank you.
First of all, could you introduce yourself and your work field and tell us about Para La Tierra? What does it do?
My name is Joseph Sarvary. I'm the Deputy Director of Para La Tierra, which is a conservation NGO working here in Paraguay. Our mission is to protect the fragile habitats of Paraguay through 3 different activities. So we do scientific research, community engagement, and environmental education. And all 3 of those come together to help us better protect the habitats that are found here.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. It's really interesting. I look at your website. You have a lot of things you do in this area, and you have volunteers also, quite many. And so I look at that you have been active about 10 years. So tell us a little bit how things have changed in 10 years and like the amount of non-governmental organization in environmental field in Paraguay. And
so we began 10 years ago, it seems like a long time now, mostly focusing on science. And so Paraguay is a very unique country. It is at the border of a ton of different habitats. And so you have the Atlantic forest that comes from the east, the Chaco that comes from the north, grasslands coming from the south, the Amazon rainforest sits just above Paraguay. And so scientifically it's a very interesting place to study. And very little work has been done beforehand, so there's species living in Paraguay that have never been found before. And so when we began, we focused on those, on the science, on discovering what was here, what we could possibly protect. But over the years, we realized that just discovering what existed wasn't enough. People didn't care that there was a new species of lizard living in this small part of their country. It was just a lizard to them. And so that's when we began trying to work with the communities and working with children and in schools on environmental education projects that would take what we were learning from the science that we did and communicate it to people who were in the position to make a difference on the protection of the habitats involved. And so as a conservation organization, I think we've evolved a lot over the past 10 years, growing from a scientific research organization to a more comprehensive conservation organization.
Yeah, thanks. It's really interesting to hear about how has your organization evolved in time. And what is your relationship to government? So how is the government and like the NGO relationship? Because I know it's really difficult sometimes.
It can be very difficult. We are a NGO, so we do not, we're not affiliated with the government, but there are situations in which we have to work together. For example, all the scientific research we do, we need permits from the government to allow us to do the work that we do. And from the beginning, we've always received support for the projects that we wanted to enact. And so we did feel that support. However, working with government, especially here in Paraguay or in South America in general possibly, the government organizations change quite rapidly as different people come in and out of power. And so we've not been able to sustain a long-term relationship because the Ministry of the Environment changes so frequently. That being said, there are certainly situations in which we would like more support from the government. I don't want to go into too much detail about the difficulties of working with or without the support of the government, but one area in which we do seem to overlap quite a lot is with our environmental education aspect. We have begun working with the public school system to insert some of our self-made curriculum materials into schools so that the children living and working around the city that we live in are learning about the incredible animals and biodiversity that we are working with here locally in the Nyembuku wetland complex. And so the government or the education system has been quite supportive to us despite other areas being a bit more difficult.
Yeah. How about the influencing in policy making? So what's the situation in that in Paraguay? Is that like how government is listening to NGOs' voice in the decision making?
It's hard to say blanket yes or no to that. However, the WWF has a Paraguay branch, and they work quite hard and consistently on trying to affect environmental policy here. And they have had a few successes. Recently, they enacted a law to continue protecting areas of the Atlantic forest. But also, I believe that more than just NGOs, there is a new generation of young Paraguayans that want to protect the environment and are aware of climate change and the damage that is happening due to deforestation or contamination. And they are beginning to make their voices heard. And so the politicians are forced to respond to this because there is this upswelling of youth that care about the environment and want their politicians to do something about its protection. We as a small NGO don't work in policy, but it is very nice to see that our mission is shared by so many young Paraguayans that are acting on behalf of the country as a whole.
Yeah, it's really good to hear. And I read about the deforestation in Paraguay. Like there was some number that 2% of Atlantic rainforest is only left in Paraguay at the moment. So could you tell us about what has led to this situation? And
so the Atlantic forest went through a period of deforestation over the past maybe 4 or 5 decades. And the goal of that deforestation was agricultural growth. And the Atlantic forest comes into Paraguay and basically covered historically the eastern third of the country. And that section of the country is now mostly soy and cattle ranches. And Paraguay was maybe when we founded the organization, the fastest growing economy of South America because of its incredible agricultural development. And so through the deforestation of the Atlantic forest, Paraguay became a successful economy. The issue is today, there is no more Atlantic forest to chop down. And the small sections that do exist are in small fragments, which is quite difficult to sustain biodiversity. There are 2 larger fragments in Reserva Umbaracayú and San Rafael National Park. These are the only 2 large remaining continuous fragments of Atlantic forest. And they're both under threat themselves for different reasons. But the Atlantic forest, such a small amount of it remains that there isn't that much of an opportunity to continue developing that region. Only 2% remains, so for business purposes, it's completely used up. And what's happening now is agricultural businesses are moving towards the Chaco biome, which is the northern part of Paraguay, which had been thought as being a unfertile, useless stretch of wilderness, and nobody wanted to do business there. Recently, they've developed a new way to fertilize the land that allows you to ranch cattle quite well there. And so right now, there's a fire sale on Chaco properties where the eastern part of Paraguay that was Atlantic forest was deforested 20 years ago. Today, they're deforesting the Chaco at the same rate that they were deforesting the Atlantic forest all those years ago. And so it's likely that if nothing is done, if nothing changes, that pretty soon it will be the same statistic of only 2% of what this once was massive habitat remains of the only other large habitat in Paraguay, which is the Gran Chaco. And so it's quite easy to see these similarities between the history of the Atlantic forest and what's happening today in the Gran Chaco.
That was really interesting to hear, and really sad about the situation about the Paraguayan Atlantic forest. And I would like to hear more about the economic situation, like what is the link between the economic growth of Paraguay to global economy, and so what has led to this rapid growth of agriculture in Paraguay, and what has been the causes of that?
There was a recent news article about how a lot of European charcoal for lighting your barbecue was coming from forests being chopped down in Paraguay, from the Chaco, which I was just speaking about. And there is a strong link there from trees that are being chopped down in Paraguay being used to light fires in Europe, which seems ridiculous. The other large agricultural, or the larger agricultural business of soy and cattle are all for export. And I know off the top of my head one of the biggest importers of Paraguayan soy and beef is China. I am positive that Europe also imports beef. There was a recent study or analysis that said that Paraguayan beef had surpassed Argentinian beef in its quality and flavor, and so it was becoming more popular in the global north. And there's a large sort of link if you are to travel through Paraguay and look at the expansive farms that stretch for miles and miles and miles with no towns or sort of settlements nearby. And it's because all the wealth that is being created from those massive farms are going to a very small subset of rich landowners. And most of that wealth is sort of dealt with at the international scale of import-export. And there isn't that much infusion of wealth going down into the Paraguayan communities that really need the benefit of the improving economy, that isn't really trickling down to the level that you would hope to see if you were to travel through the more rural areas of Paraguay.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting to hear about the like the link of the economic system and how, because it's always related to that. Yeah. The situation, what is happening, it's always the economic is always involved. And you said a little bit about what has it caused to the environment, but how have you seen in the changes in nature's biodiversity in Paraguay in 10 years?
In the in the Chaco, there's a huge huge difference. Just from driving the roads up to the Chaco, 10 years ago, you would see large numbers of animals crossing the road. It would not be traveled very frequently, and the amount of biodiversity in the surrounding forests touching the road would be abundant. And today, because of the increased business going on there, the increased number of trucks going up and down that road, the increased deforestation surrounding the areas, there's a interesting image of if you go on Google Earth and look at the Chaco from above, you see this network of yellow squares getting cut out of the green forest that spiral outwards from the road systems. And so where there used to be a few small towns, and when you drove between them, you would see tapir or capybara or peccaries crossing the road. Today, the forest around those roads has been removed and cut down for cattle ranching, and there's no more habitat left for these big roaming animals. And just by driving the roads, you don't even have to go into the forests or sort of explore the national parks to see the impact that's being had on the biodiversity of that once amazing and incredibly rich habitat. It doesn't really exist anymore, or in those areas around the roads. And the worry or the concern is that cancer of agricultural fields is going to continue growing, continue taking over the forests. And if there isn't something that is done soon, that's definitely going to happen. But alongside that depressing transition over the past 10 years, the transition of the political conversation led by university students and the youth of the country about protecting the Chaco, about protecting the habitats that exist in this country, is quite invigorating and inspiring. And so we're sort of seeing this changing of the guard where the people in power today are still permitting this deforestation. But the people who are coming up, the youth are coming up to say, we want to stop this, we want to change the way this is being done. And so I think hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll see a rebound of a protection for and a valuing of the nature of Paraguay by this youthful uprising that is coming up today.
Yeah, thanks. That's really nice to hear about that there's like opposite like forces coming like because it's really needed to have a new kind of a direction where it's going, and so I think that has been a really good achievement about the youth uprising. And how do you? I would like to hear about what would be the best cooperation with the European, and what could European NGOs do to help the situation in South America and like the.
So I think there are several ways in which foreign NGOs can help protect South American, but particularly Paraguayan habitats. One, I think, is simply raising awareness that the biodiversity exists here. There's a lot of focus or media attention given to the Amazon rainforest because it is the largest rainforest, because it's so amazingly biodiverse. But the reality is, if you take the time to look at and explore the other habitats across South America, you find a similar appreciation for the nature that exists outside of the Amazon rainforest that is already receiving a lot of attention. And so I think simply by spreading the word that Paraguay exists, that the Grand Chaco is home to jaguars and tapirs and puma and all these amazing species that are at risk of having their habitat destroyed, will help as the organizations here try and look for support. People will have heard of them and will value what it is they're trying to protect. And a second way that European NGOs can help is by helping us find funds to run our projects. A lot of times the governments or the funds that are given internally to Paraguay are limited, and so the organizations have to compete amongst themselves to run their projects. And in Europe, or not just in Europe, but sort of again in the global north, there's a more well understood importance to protecting the environment, and the ramifications of destroying habitats that maybe are tens of thousands of kilometers away will still have an impact at home. Offers an opportunity in which these giant areas of forest can be protected and can benefit people living in other countries. But here at home, here in Paraguay, that awareness of the importance is less widespread. And so by helping us, organizations working here, find and communicate with larger funds that might exist or interested parties that exist in other countries can be a huge way for us to create long-lasting partnerships that will allow us to sustain our projects long into the future. And that's one thing that is a big struggle all the time, is you can get funding for 1 or 2 years, but that's not enough time to achieve a change at the level of society, at the level of community that you want to see. And so I think those are sort of the two ways in which foreign NGOs can help, is by establishing a knowledge about Paraguay and about the issues and about the importance of this place, and then also helping us find the links and the contacts to communicate what we are doing with people who care.
Okay, thank you. That was really good advices for us also. So it's really nice to hear how can we, because it's really, there's so much things that could be done, and but it needs focus. What's the focus? And you have the best knowledge of the situation in here, so it's really helpful for us. So thank you for the interview.
No, thank you for coming down to check us out and learn about us. It's really an honor to host you both.
Okay, thank you. Kiitoksia. Nyt tässä on ensimmäinen meidän video. Tässä oli hyvä oppia nyt tästä Paraguayn tilanteesta, joka on ollut aika mielenkiintoinen kyllä nähdä myös itse täällä tätä ja aika huolestuttava kyllä. Mutta tästä jatketaan seuraavissa videoissa.